Imagine the phone ringing after midnight. On the other end, a detective quietly tells you your child has done the unthinkable. An act so brutal the world will forever label them a killer. In the coming hours, headlines will explode, strangers will judge, and society will demand your shame or your silence. Yet, in the deepest corner of your heart, this is still the child you once rocked to sleep. Where does a parent's love end, and where does judgment begin? Before we unravel the untold struggles of parents who stand in the shadow of their child's crimes, a quick note: if stories like this matter to you, if you believe true crime should also explore the human cost behind the headlines, subscribe to Dark Truth, True Crime Stories now, and turn on the bell. It's the easiest way to stay with us for every chapter of this deeper conversation. Why parents of killers matter in true crime. Picture a quiet living room just after sunset. Family photographs line the mantle. A toddler grinning in overalls. A teenager clutching a football trophy. A young man beaming at his college graduation. These are ordinary snapshots, the kind you scroll past without a second thought. Now imagine that same young man's face appearing on the evening news, framed by the words, "charged with murder." For most of us, true crime is a story about someone else's nightmare. For the parents of a killer, it is the demolition of their own lives in real time. The day an arrest is made, they are pulled into a vortex of headlines, police statements, and the searing knowledge that the child they nurture is forever linked to tragedy. Why linger here? Because ignoring the parent's experience leaves half the human story untold. Every murderer, whether infamous like Ted Bundy or obscure like a neighbor no one suspected, was once cradled, diapered, taught to tie shoes. To reduce the narrative to monster versus victims misses the moral earthquake felt by those who raised a perpetrator. Experts in grief psychology describe this as ambiguous bereavement. The parent hasn't lost a child to death, yet they have lost a child they thought they knew. Love collides with revulsion. Memory clashes with reality. One part of the heart screams protect, another whispers condemn. Few emotional states are as violently contradictory. And then comes the public. Cameras at the curb. Reporters dialing every relative. Comment threads filled with suspicion. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Strangers dissect decades of family life from the distance of a keyboard, reducing complex human bonds to easy blame. This is why the parental perspective matters. It tells us about resilience, denial, shame, and the ways ordinary people attempt to stand upright while the moral floor caves in beneath them. It forces us to confront a question we'd rather avoid. If the unthinkable happened in our own home, what would we do? Would we distance ourselves to appease society? Or would we cling, quietly or publicly, to the thread of connection that once defined our very identity? A serious look at true crime cannot stop at the crime scene tape. The ripples reach kitchens, bedrooms, and family dinner tables we will never see on camera. Studying parents of killers does not excuse atrocity. It simply acknowledges that the blast radius of violence extends far beyond the act, and that understanding the survivors on the perpetrator's side deepens our grasp of what it means to be human. The universal question: where did we go wrong? A kitchen clock ticks in the stillness after the phone call. The house hasn't changed, family photos still smile from the walls. Last night's dishes wait by the sink, yet everything feels foreign. Somewhere in the swirl of disbelief, a single sentence floats up like a buoy. Where did we go wrong? Almost every parent of a violent offender utters that question. It is instinct, not logic. A lifetime of caregiving primes the brain to search for errors when harm occurs. It's the same reflex that drives a mother to replay the day her toddler tripped, or a father to replay a teenage car accident, but magnified 1,000-fold. Clinical psychologists call this the parental guilt spiral. It begins with mental time travel. A father re-examines a discipline he used when his son skipped school. A mother replays a night she ignored a slammed bedroom door. Tiny, ordinary moments are recast as possible crossroads. Did I fail to comfort him? Did I shame her instead of listening? Was there an early fracture I never saw? The guilt spiral rarely finds a satisfying answer. Research across decades shows that violent crime rarely stems from a single parental misstep. Neurology, temperament, peer influences, mental illness, random circumstance they weave together in unpredictable ways. Yet logic cannot silence the parental heartbeat. The mind whispers, if I had done more, because accepting powerlessness feels worse than accepting blame. Outside voices intensify the torment. Headlines recycle cliches. Troubled childhood? Broken home? Talk show pundits hint. Something must have gone wrong in that house. Even well-meaning friends ask careful, pity-tinged questions. Did you see any signs? Each word presses a needle deeper, suggesting that love and vigilance should have prevented catastrophe. Some parents retreat into self-punishment, quietly reviewing every holiday, every scolding, every praise as if conducting a trial. Others build walls of rationalization to survive. We were good parents. This is not our doing. Neither path erases the ache. Both are strategies to make sense of senselessness. The unanswerable nature of where did we go wrong leaves many parents suspended between past and present, longing for a timeline they could rewind but never can. It is the first wound of parental survival, invisible, relentless, and largely unseen by the outside world. Case study: Ted Bundy's parent silence. Few names in crime history generate such chilling fascination as Ted Bundy. Charismatic, educated, monstrous. When the full scale of his murders surfaced, the world searched for clues in his upbringing, yet the voices of his parents barely whispered. Bundy grew up under a shroud of family secrecy. For years, he believed his grandparents were his parents and his biological mother was his sister, a twist of identity that may have planted seeds of confusion long before his crimes. When police tied him to a string of killings, his family slipped into near-total privacy. No press tours, no emotional interviews, just silence. Why? Silence can be a survival strategy. Imagine opening your front door to find microphones thrust forward, strangers dissecting your every expression. Imagine knowing that any defense you offer will be read as excuse-making, any condemnation as betrayal. Remaining quiet becomes a kind of armor. Neighbors recall glimpses of Ted's mother attending court hearings, Bible in hand, eyes fixed somewhere just beyond the reporter's cameras. Her presence spoke volumes. She did not abandon her son, yet she did not wage a public campaign on his behalf. Friends later suggested she carried quiet anguish, reconciling maternal instinct with horror. But publicly, she offered almost nothing. The absence of narrative from Bundy's parents shaped public perception. Without commentary, society filled a vacuum with speculation. Were they ashamed? Were they in denial? But their restraint may have preserved the dignity and privacy they had left. In the chaos of infamy, silence was one of the few choices they controlled. This patterned strategic withdrawal remains common among families blindsided by crime. It neither absolves nor condemns. It merely carves a small, defensible space for breathing while the world screams for answers. Case study: Jeffrey Dahmer's parents' public statements. If Bundy's parents chose near invisibility, Jeffrey Dahmer's parents walked the opposite road. Dahmer's crimes, dismemberment, cannibalism, unimaginable violence made headlines around the globe. Yet his father, Lionel, stepped into the light, speaking with a rawness that startled many. In interviews, Lionel described Jeffrey as a shy child fascinated by animals and science experiments. He admitted guilt for missing warning signs, recounting small incidents' cruelty to insects, an unsettling interest in carcasses that seemed harmless at the time. His book, A Father's Story, reads like an open wound. A man replaying decades of parenting under the glare of hindsight. Why expose such pain? Psychologists call this meaning making a drive to wrest coherence from chaos. By narrating his family's experience, Lionel sought agency. He could not undo the killings, but he could bear witness, educate, and perhaps spare another parent the torment of unasked questions. The public response was mixed. Some praised his candor, seeing humility and remorse. Others bristled, fearing his reflections softened Dahmer's monstrosity. Yet even critics acknowledge the humanity bleeding through each page, a father neither excusing nor disowning, but wrestling aloud with impossible truth. Joyce Dahmer, Jeffrey's mother, navigated differently, oscillating between grief, denial, and desperate attempts to understand her son's psyche. She granted selective interviews, at times expressing sorrow for victims, while pleading that her child's humanity not be erased. Her words often carried the tremor of a mother, still clinging to fragments of the boy she once rocked to sleep. Together, Lionel and Joyce revealed an essential paradox. Parent of killers often occupy a liminal space, condemned if they speak, erased if they don't. In daring to speak, the Dahmers offer the world an uncomfortable gift, a glimpse of love, enduring amid horror, grief voiced rather than buried. Case study: Scott Peterson's family defenses. Christmas lights still hung from lampposts in Modesto, California, when Laci Peterson vanished in December 2002. By spring, suspicion had hardened around her husband, Scott. The case became a media tempest, daily press briefings, breaking news crawls, a courtroom drama consumed nationwide. Inside that storm, the Peterson family closed ranks. Footage from the era shows Scott's parents and siblings stepping to microphones, calm but resolute. They questioned investigative timelines, hired private counsel, defended Scott's character. Their words painted a portrait of a son who doted on family, loved baseball, and once cried at a sibling's wedding toast. To outsiders, this looked like willful blindness. To them, it was reality, the only reality they had ever known. Psychologists described this as narrative preservation. Families under siege anchor themselves to the memories they lived. Birthdays, inside jokes, late-night talks. They replay these as evidence of the person they know, refusing to let headlines define decades of experience. For the Petersons, public defense was not merely loyalty, it was identity protection. To admit Scott capable of murder was to accept that the man they nurtured was a stranger. Denial became life raft. The backlash was fierce. Tabloids branded them apologists, forums mocked their statements. Yet within the family, that advocacy was survival. It allowed them to keep breathing, to keep believing they were not complicit in raising a killer. Even years later, debates linger about Scott's guilt versus fairness of trial. But the Peterson family stance underscores a universal parental reflex. When the world convicts, some hearts still search the child they knew, clinging to love as both refuge and rebellion. Case study: Adam Lanza's mother, Sandy Hook. A December morning in Connecticut. Frost on the windows, the kind of quiet that makes school buses hum like distant bees. When the world learned that 21st graders and 6 staff were gone at Sandy Hook Elementary, all roads led back to a modest home where Nancy Lanza had lived with her withdrawn son, Adam. Nancy never had the chance to defend herself. She was Adam's first victim. Yet her legacy became courtroom and newsroom fodder overnight. Commentators demanded to know, why were there firearms in a house with a fragile, isolated young man? Why homeschool him? Why not push for stronger psychiatric intervention? Friends painted Nancy as attentive, someone who drove long hours to find programs Adam could tolerate, someone who navigated a maze of therapists, special education meetings, and rejections from schools that deemed her son too complex. Emails show her asking for guidance, searching for something that would soothe the boy slipping further into seclusion. This is where the public often stumbles. We imagine binary parenting either negligent or perfect. Nancy's story sits in the gray. She took him shooting, yes, but also shielded him from social ridicule. She documented meltdown for doctors, pleaded for answers, tried incremental steps. All of it failed against currents she could neither map nor master. Her absence of voice after the massacre became its own narrative. Critics decided she enabled. Some neighbors insisted she was exhausted, improvising against a storm she never named. The truth likely lives in fragments, a mother's exhausted calculus between autonomy and safety, privacy and intervention. In her silence, we project our fears. That love, vigilance, and every ounce of good intention can still leave cracks wide enough for tragedy. Case study: Nikolas Cruz's guardians, Parkland. Valentine's Day 2018. Students at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High should have been swapping candy hearts. Instead, sirens wailed. 17 lives ended. The gunman, Nikolas Cruz, was a former student whose history was littered with red flags. Nikolas's biological parents were gone long before the shooting. His adoptive father died when he was a child. By adolescence, he and his brother lived with Linda Cruz, a widow stretched thin between grief, finances, and 2 difficult sons. Friends recall Linda seeking therapy, discipline classes, behavioral programs. Teachers remember endless meetings about Nikolas's meltdowns, obsessions, threats. By the time Linda died in 2017, the family web had frayed. Neighbors reported concern. Police logs revealed dozens of calls about fights, self-harm, weapons. The Sneed family, friends of Nikolas's brother, took him in to give him stability. They imposed rules: lock up guns, no cruelty to animals, attend school. Still, no one foresaw the massacre brewing. After the shooting, the Sneeds' interviews were pained defensive. "We had no clue," they insisted. "If we thought he was dangerous, he wouldn't have lived here." Critics bristled. "How could you not know?" Supporters countered. "He was grieving. We wanted to help." Psychologists recognize the optimism biased the belief we detect danger before it erupts. Guardians rarely see themselves as harboring catastrophe. They see the kid making progress, the outbursts that aren't so bad. Hindsight sharpens every shadow. In real time, patterns blur into normal chaos. The Sneed story illustrates an under-examined truth. Many caretakers of future killers are ordinary, flawed, and hopeful. They trust tiny signs of improvement, cling to reassurance, never imagining they're hosting history's next headline. Chris Watts compared to other family killers' parents. By the time America knew the name Chris Watts, his parents were already staring at an abyss. August 2018 news breaks that Sean Ann, Bella, and Celeste are missing. In the first hours, the Watts family saw a son, a grandson, a brother pleading on camera. A father's instinct says he's telling the truth, but days later, a polygraph fails. Confession follows. The narrative implodes. Unlike serial killers who horrify strangers, Chris's case targeted the people everyone assumed were safe: wife, daughters, unborn child. His parents toggled between grief for Sean Ann and disbelief about Chris. Early interviews show them gentle, guarded, sometimes hinting that things weren't perfect in the marriage. Critics accuse them of shading blame toward Sean Ann. Supporters argued they were clinging to anything that explained the unexplainable. Compared with Bundy or Dahmer, the Watts case carried a subtler cruelty. There was no decades-long descent into violence, no carnival of deviance. He looked like a neighbor you'd trust with your spare key. That ordinariness intensified parental disorientation. It's easier, oddly, to accept a son as a monster when he's been strange all his life. Harder when he was a little league coach, the quiet kid who never stirred trouble. The Watts parents' media moments, sometimes awkward, sometimes defensive, mirror thousands of living room debates viewers never see. Do we mourn our grandchildren publicly? Do we protect our son privately? Can love survive this fracture? Their story is less about exoneration, more about survival navigating grief that pulls in opposite directions. Similarities in defensive narratives across cases. Step back from the headlines, and patterns emerge like constellations. Across decades, cultures, and crimes, the parental lexicon repeats. He was such a sweet boy. We never imagined he could hurt anyone. If only he'd gotten better help. The media is twisting everything. Why such uniformity? Psychology suggests 3 forces. Cognitive dissonance, accepting a loved one as killer collides violently with decades of memory. To ease the clash, minds seek alternative frame stress. Injustice, misunderstanding. Attachment survival. Love evolved as a survival trait. Severing it abruptly, my child is evil, threatens a parent's identity. Defensive scripts preserve connection. Social threat. Communities stigmatize killers' families. Parents instinctively counteract that stigma by insisting on decency, context, humanity. The repetition is not conspiracy. It is human. Love's vocabulary shrinks when horror expands. Phrases echo because they're the only bridge left between unbearable truth and unbearable loss. He was always a good boy, a common theme. The phrase has become almost caricature. He was always a good boy. Late-night comedians parody it. Pundits roll eyes. But beneath the cliché lives something primal. When parents reach for those words, they're not issuing a courtroom brief, they're gasping for air. They're remembering the child who brought them dandelions, who cried at a cartoon, who begged for one more bedtime story. In tragedy's glare, those memories risk erasure. Saying good boy is a plea. Don't let the worst day rewrite every day that came before. Sociologists call this memory anchoring. Parents grasp at images untouched by crime, planting flags in childhood innocence. To outsiders, it sounds tone deaf. To the speaker, it's oxygen. Proof they once raised a human being, not merely a headline. There is also subtle resistance. By affirming goodness, parents push against a narrative that collapses identity into crime. They insist their child is more than the act, even if that insistence isolates them socially. For documentarians, this phrase invites nuance. Mocking it trivializes agony. Contextualizing it reveals a raw wiring of family love. It is less denial than desperate preservation, a candle lit against an unending dark. Shifting blame to mental health. When the news cycle spits out a name and a body count, the next sentence often includes a diagnosis: depression, bipolar, schizophrenia. For parents, this language can feel like a life raft. If the crime lives in a medical chart, then perhaps it was never truly their child's soul that acted. It was an illness, a misfiring brain, a tragedy of chemistry rather than character. In living rooms across America, grieving parents whisper phrases like he wasn't himself or she'd stop taking her meds. They are not rewriting reality. They're searching for a narrative that allows them to grieve without suffocating in guilt. Clinical language offers distance. It lets a mother remember Sunday dinners without picturing the crime scene. Consider the Dahmer family. Joyce Dahmer, long before Jeffrey's arrest, had pleaded for mental health support, describing her son's detachment, his drinking, his darkness. After the horrors came to light, interviews leaned heavily on the possibility of disorder, as if naming it could soften the edges of what he'd done. Psychologists note that this isn't always pure denial. Assigning agency to illness reflects an instinctive human sorting. Bad people versus sick people. When a parent can relocate their child to the second column, love remains survivable. Without that, the parent faces an existential chasm. Did I nurture evil, or did I miss an illness I might have treated? Shifting blame to victims or society. There's a darker contour to defensive narratives, shifting blame outward. Parents under siege may grasp at any explanation that spares them the unbearable thought that their child acted with deliberate malice. Society becomes a villain. The internet, video games, cruel classmates, a spouse who pushed too far. In the Chris Watts case, subtle comments appeared that Shauna was controlling, that he felt trapped. Such words ignite outrage because they can sound like rationalizing murder. But at their root lies something more complex, a grieving mind reshaping causality to preserve the image of a fundamentally decent child. History offers parallels. Some relatives of Scott Peterson floated theories about his marriage strain and media obsession, framing Scott as overwhelmed rather than cold-blooded. In Parkland's aftermath, fingers pointed toward bullying, social alienation, gun culture. Outsiders hear excuse, insiders feel survival. Sociologists call this externalization, the human habit of attributing catastrophe to forces beyond the self. It is not always malicious, it's a psychic splint on a shattered heart. To admit a child chose evil freely is to accept that love, guidance, and decades of nurture may count for nothing. For many, that truth is simply too heavy to carry. The role of media pressure on parents. Within hours of a mass killing, cameras ring the driveway, satellite trucks idle, headlines cycle by the minute. Parents of killers wake into a new identity, villains by bloodline. Every expression, every phrase, is parsed for hidden motives. A quiver of the lip becomes conspiracy fodder. Ted Bundy's mother refused most interviews, fearing misquotation. Dahmer's father chose a book where he could at least shape the nuance himself. The Sneeds in Parkland sat for CNN, their grief colliding with journalists' need for narrative clarity. Critics still said they were too calm, too apologetic, too defensive. Media theorists described this as secondary trauma. While the world debates motive, the parent navigates flashbulbs, legal advice, online death threats. Their kitchen phone won't stop ringing. Strangers leave hate mail. Some families relocate under assumed names, erasing decades of roots. Defensiveness under such pressure is almost predictable. When a reporter's microphone equates your DNA with carnage, instinct stiffens. Words like he's not a monster escape, not a strategy, but as reflex one final barrier between the parent and annihilating shame. Cultural and regional differences in parental defenses. Parental narratives do not sprout in a vacuum. They are seated in culture. In collectivist societies, parts of Asia, Africa, Latin America, family honor intertwines with identity. A child's crime stains a lineage. Silence, or even relocation, may be preferred to public airing of guilt. In contrast, Western cultures often prize self-expression and litigation, prompting books, interviews, and talk show tearfulness. Take Japan's Gomen Nasai culture. Parents of violent offenders have been known to bow publicly, apologize, sometimes even pay reparations to victims' families and embodied acceptance of shame. Compare that with certain U.S. families who emphasize individuality. He made his own choices. We did our best. Religious backdrop matters, too. Evangelical parents might frame crime as spiritual warfare. Catholic families might speak of sin and penance. Secular households might stress mental health or societal breakdown. Each narrative aligns with the moral grammar of its context. These contrasts remind us there is no universal right way to respond. What seems like denial in one country might be honor-preserving contrition in another. Media framing rarely captures those nuances, flattening complexity into convenient headlines. Gender dynamics. Mothers versus fathers in defense. Step into any courtroom gallery and notice who clutches a defense bench. More often than not, it's the mother's hands folded white-knuckle tight. Fathers appear too, but research shows maternal defense is both more frequent and more emotionally explicit. Why? Biology and socialization braid together. From pregnancy onward, mothers internalize responsibility, nourishment, safety, emotional climate. When a son or daughter commits murder, that ledger of care inverts into guilt. Phrases like "I should have seen it," and "I failed" him echo in interviews. Consider Dahmer's mother, Joyce, dogged by accusations that her medication used during pregnancy caused Jeffrey's issues. She oscillated between advocacy for mental health and quiet despair. Contrast that with Lionel Dahmer, who often spoke analytically, framing Jeffrey's darkness through genetics and family history. Fathers sometimes retreat into stoicism, fearing emotional display may be read as weakness. Yet their silence is not absence, it is its own form of coping, an internal negotiation few are taught to voice. Some fathers overcompensate, joining defense funds, lobbying attorneys, insisting on the real story. Others vanish, unable to reconcile love and revulsion. Understanding these dynamics demands empathy. Gendered expectations weigh differently, but grief and disorientation are universal. Each parent gropes for a posture that will let them keep breathing, even while the world condemns. Silence as a strategy. Parents who never spoke. Some families decide that no answer is safer than the wrong one. After the first tidal wave of press inquiries, a few simply disappear from the public square. They decline interviews, refuse statements, draw curtains, and let the narrative unfold without them. It is not always cowardice. Often it is triage. When Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, was finally unmasked, his family issued only the briefest acknowledgement, then retreated. The silence spared them the inevitable parsing of every adjective. Words, once released, are forever searchable, quotable, misinterpretable. Silence, at least, cannot be twisted. For many parents, quiet becomes a sanctuary. Inside their homes, they grieve, rage, and sift memories without the glare of commentary. Journalists may speculate, but the family's heartache remains unfilmed. Some neighbors misread this as indifference. In reality, it is a conscious refusal to feed a spectacle. Trauma counselors often recommend this path when media pressure feels unbearable. Healing, they say, happens in stillness. For a parent whose name now trends alongside slaughter, stillness can be the last remaining control. Parents who publicly apologize for their child. Others choose the opposite path, stepping into microphones and apologizing with trembling voices. They frame their grief in sentences the victims' families may never forgive, but the public often respects. After the Columbine massacre, the parents of Dylan Klebold offered an apology that acknowledged horror without attempting excuse. Their statement did not rewrite facts. It admitted devastation, sorrow, and a failure they may never fully name. Why apologize when you did not pull the trigger? Many parents feel moral injury, a rupture in the belief that love alone can keep a child from darkness. Saying I'm sorry becomes an act of witness. I know my child's choices shattered lives, and though I didn't cause it, I acknowledge the wound. Public apologies sometimes reopen wounds within the family. Siblings may feel betrayed, relatives may argue about phrasing, lawyers may worry about civil liability. Yet, for some, contrition is the only way to keep breathing and anchor against the undertow of shame. Parents who wrote books defending their child. When grief will not stay silent, the page becomes confessional space. Books by parents of killers, the nonfiction shelves. Each a portrait of love contorted by atrocity. Lionel Dahmer's memoir, A Father's Story, wrestles with questions no parent wants to imagine. Did I miss the signs? Could intervention have saved lives? Writing serves dual purposes. First, it seizes narrative agency from tabloids. Second, it allows nuanced context, history, family dynamics, illness, subtle cues outsiders cannot see in a headline. Some volumes tilt toward defense, others toward stark self-reproach. Critics accuse such works of profiteering. Authors insist the intent is testimony, healing, or cautionary wisdom. Readers vacillate between empathy and suspicion. Yet every page underscores a truth rarely admitted in sound bites. Loving a killer does not switch off overnight. Through ink, parents craft a survivable identity, neither accomplice nor denier, but witness. Books cannot redeem the dead, but they sometimes salvage meaning from senselessness. Impact on family reputation and legacy. Long after trials conclude, a surname carries new weight. Former co-workers avert eyes at the grocery store. Holiday cards arrive unsigned. Children of the perpetrator's siblings are teased in classrooms. Reputation, built over decades, collapses overnight. Sociologists call this courtesy stigma guilt by association. Families of notorious killers often face housing discrimination, job rejections, even threats of vigilante justice. Some change names. Others relocate across state lines, hoping anonymity will dull the whispers. Legacy becomes a battlefield. Alumni associations scrub plaques. Churches quietly rescind committee roles, and community boards sidestep invitations. Inside the family, elders argue, do we keep our heads down or fight for nuance? Some mount legal defenses to reclaim a narrative, Others build foundations in victims' names, hoping contrition might rewrite history. The unspoken truth. Every press clipping, every podcast keeps the surname tethered to blood. A family once defined by soccer games and Sunday barbecues is now defined by a date, a crime scene, a mug shot. Public sympathy versus public outrage. The crowd's verdict is seldom nuanced. Parents are cast as enablers or martyrs, heroes or cowards. One news cycle praises stoic grief. The next calls it crocodile tears. Online forums become tribunals, dissecting tone of voice, wardrobe, even the absence of tears. Sympathy occasionally emerges when parents show raw humility. We are devastated. We loved him. We failed somewhere. Outrage reignites when any hint of excuse creeps and he was misunderstood, the victim provoked. Social media amplifies this polarity. A 10-second clip, stripped of context, can define a family for years. For grieving parents, public opinion is a weather they cannot control. Some beg for understanding. Others turn inward, rejecting validation from strangers. The deeper tragedy is that nuance seldom trends. Outrage is faster, simpler, louder. Every headline reduces a household's complexity to caricature. The parents of killers live suspended between empathy seekers and pitchforks, trying to mourn while the world measures their sorrow against an impossible moral ledger. The fine line between love and enabling. Parental love is wired for protection. From scraped knees to broken hearts, instinct says shield first, analyze later. But when protection continues after undeniable harm, where is the threshold? Clinical psychologists describe this tension as an attachment paradox. A mother's biology pulls her toward comfort. Morality demands distance. Some families pivot between these poles hourly, offering compassion in a prison visit, then collapsing into guilt in the parking lot. Consider the parents of Kip Kinkle, the Oregon school shooter. Letters later revealed attempts to explain, contextualize, humanize, efforts that outsiders saw as making excuses. Inside the family, those same efforts felt like oxygen. Without them, they feared despair would consume what remained of their lives. Love is not endorsement. Yet, when expressed publicly, it is often read that way. A parent's whispered "I still love you" is sacred in a visiting room, but scandalous when broadcast on the evening news. The dilemma is unsolvable: abandon the child and betray the bond, or stand by and risk appearing complicit. The legal implications of parents' narratives. Words can soothe or wound, but they can also subpoena. Defense attorneys may welcome a sympathetic family statement. Prosecutors scrutinize every syllable for bias or obstruction. Insurance claims, wrongful death suits, even housing contracts can hinge on phrasing. After the Parkland shooting, Nikolas Cruz's guardians issued a carefully vetted statement drafted with legal counsel. It conveyed sorrow while avoiding liability, a dance between empathy and self-protection. Civil suits loom large. One ill-considered admission, we should have known, can cost a family its home. Attorneys warn grieving parents to avoid speculation. Do not guess motive. Do not promise restitution. The law hears such phrases as evidence, not emotion, yet silence feels inhuman. This is why some families retreat behind legal shields. It isn't apathy. It is survival within a system where grief is admissible. Every tearful apology can become Exhibit A. Every memoir deposition waiting to happen. Comparing U.S. versus international cases. Parental narratives are not universal. In the United States, where litigation and 24-hour news dominate, statements are polished, lawyered, scrutinized. Abroad, cultural context shifts tone. In Japan, some families of violent offenders perform shizai formal apology rituals involving public bows, handwritten letters, and sometimes restitution to victims' families. In parts of Scandinavia, parents often engage openly with restorative justice. meeting victims' relatives to share sorrow rather than defend lineage. The case of Anders Breivik in Norway revealed a national emphasis on societal failure rather than parental blame. Breivik's mother endured scrutiny, but also received state-funded psychological care. Contrast that with American families relocating under assumed names after lesser crimes. Understanding these differences underscores a point. Narrative is not only psychology, but culture. The same words, "he was a good boy," once sound conciliatory in one country, deflective in another. The global lens reminds us that judgment is shaped as much by geography as by ethics. The role of faith and religion in parental defense. For some, belief becomes a last refuge. Prayer circles, scripture, and the promise of redemption provide scaffolding when reality feels unspeakable. A Bible verse scribbled into a visiting room logbook can mean the difference between numbness and breath. Lionel Dahmer wrote of clinging to the notion that no soul is beyond forgiveness. The Watts parents referenced spiritual comfort, even as the world demanded condemnation. Faith communities sometimes close ranks around these parents, offering casseroles and scripture, while outsiders sneer at moral weakness. Religion reframes horror. Sin can be repented. Souls can be redeemed. Eternity offers a horizon beyond headlines. Critics view this as denial. Believers call it hope. For many parents, theology is less about excusing crime than about surviving the void. If mercy exists, even cosmic, unreachable mercy, then despair is not absolute. That belief, fragile though it seems, can keep a grieving parent alive. Psychological studies on parents of murderers. Academic literature calls this secondary trauma a psychological injury inflicted not by witnessing the crime, but by proximity to the perpetrator. Studies from the Journal of Family Psychology document spikes in depression, insomnia, substance abuse, and social withdrawal among these parents. Key patterns emerge. Ambiguous loss. The child is alive but transformed into someone unrecognizable. Stigmatization. Friends vanish. Neighbors whisper. Church pews empty around them. Identity collapse. If good parenting was core to self-worth, the crime detonates that identity overnight. Longitudinal research shows that healing is rare without supportive networks. Group therapy, especially with other parents of offenders, mitigates shame. Writing memoirs, engaging in restorative programs, even gardening therapy's small acts reclaim meaning in the rubble. Crucially, psychologists warn against equating parental love with denial. Many fully accept guilt, yet continue to love. Love is attachment, not legal opinion. Understanding this prevents moral oversimplification and acknowledges that grief, even for the guilty, is still grief. Survivor families' reactions to defending parents. When the parent of a killer publicly says, "He was a good son," the words echo in a different register for those left behind. To survivors, that good son is forever linked to the worst day of their lives. Some feel re-traumatized, believing their pain is diminished when the perpetrator is spoken of tenderly. Courtroom transcripts reveal tension. Victims' families glaring as a murderer's mother whispers encouragement during sentencing. Support groups sometimes issue statements urging parent of offenders to acknowledge the harm first, explain later. Yet, not all reactions are adversarial. In a few restorative justice settings, survivors have thanked parents for acknowledging grief, even offering mutual comfort. A Parkland parent once remarked, "I hate what your son did, but I don't hate you." These fragile bridges show that empathy does not always demand erasure of loss, but the default, particularly in media-charged crimes, is suspicion of any statement perceived as softening blame. Are defensive narratives helpful for healing? Psychologists debate whether public defense actually aids a parent's recovery. On one hand, framing the child's crime as an anomaly preserves identity. I did not raise a monster. On the other, endless justification can trap a parent in cognitive dissonance, delaying grief processing. Clinical case notes reveal a pattern. Those who oscillate between defense and honest sorrow eventually integrate faster than those who cling to a single story. Openness to complexity. My child did something unspeakable, yet I love and predicts better mental health outcomes. Privately, some parents rehearse defensive scripts only to discard them later. Time and therapy allow reframing from excuse-making to meaning-making. Defensive narrative becomes scaffolding a temporary bridge until genuine mourning can bear weight. The danger lies in mistaking scaffolding for a home. The aftermath. Parents living in shadows. Long after headlines fade, life becomes geography. Families relocate, alter surnames, whisper through grocery aisles. Retirement plans collapse under legal fees. Some never work again, fearing colleagues' curiosity. Loneliness becomes routine. Invitations stop. Christmas cards dwindle. Even extended relatives hesitate, unsure whether sympathy betrays victims. In a Wisconsin survey of parents of violent offenders, 82% reported chronic isolation. 47% move homes within 2 years. A father once confided to a researcher, "I am a ghost of the mortgage." That sentence captures the exile alive but untethered, pacing neighborhoods that no longer claim them. Long-term psychological cost on parents. The calendar does not neutralize shame. Studies tracking parents a decade post-conviction show lingering PTSD, intrusive images of crime scenes they never witnessed, persistent nightmares. Marriages fracture, sibling relationships strain as blame shifts. Some channel torment into activism, speaking on mental health, gun safety, prison reform. Others numb with alcohol or retreat to rural anonymity. A few experience complicated grief, a looping sorrow without resolution. Suicide risk, though understudied, surfaces repeatedly in qualitative interviews. Therapists emphasize self-forgiveness not as absolution but survival. I did not kill. I can still live. Without that pivot, guilt metastasizes, overshadowing any chance of dignity in later years. Final thoughts. What these narratives reveal about humanity. Every defensive phrase, "he was kind once," "she loved animals," is an imperfect human reaching for coherence in the wreckage. Parents of killers walk a tightrope between reality and memory, culpability and care. Their words expose an uncomfortable truth. Love does not vanish when morality demands it. Society hungers for binary roles, villain versus victim, good versus evil. Yet in the kitchen of a grieving mother, nuance lives. She can despise the act and cherish the child in the same breath. Understanding that paradox does not excuse crime. It illuminates our species' capacity for both attachment and horror. If there is a lesson, it is this. Beneath every headline lies a constellation of broken hearts, some beating for the dead, some for the damned. In studying parents' narratives, we glimpse not weakness, but the frailty of being human, forever balancing justice with the pull of unconditional love. Thank you for walking through this difficult journey with us. If today's exploration made you think, if it opened a window into humanity behind a horror, consider subscribing to Dark Truth, True Crime Stories. Your support lets us keep creating long-form investigations with care, empathy, and respect for everyone touched by these tragedies. Share this episode with someone who values deeper storytelling. And join our community in the comments because the dialogue is just beginning. Until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and keep searching for the truth beyond the headlines.